Hello everyone and welcome to One Autistic Person. This is the 42nd video in a 50 video series that I'm doing going through the statements of the autism quotient. The autism quotient is a pre-screening tool that's often used as part of the assessment process for autism. And I, like many other people, when I'm going through that process, realised that we needed to look at things from a deficit in relation to how it is diagnosed. But what I wanted to do with this group of videos that I was doing is look at it originally from a benefit perspective rather than deficit, and then it's kind of morphed into, because of the repetitiveness of some of the statements, but also because I wanted to expand my sort of thought process on these things, I was looking at things as difference. So that's where we sit now with the videos that I'm doing in relation to this. And the 42nd statement is, if I find it difficult to imagine what it would be like to be someone else. I put definitely agree to this, and I've done a lot of thinking around this, especially after my assessment and talking through that, but also talking to people around me and how that actually is manifested. And I think the most obvious answer is, and I do think this plays a part in it, is the double empathy paradox, double empathy problem, whatever you want to call it, whereby we as neurodivergent people find it difficult for us to empathise with people who are neurotypical and vice versa. Therefore, it can get to a point where it's really difficult to understand the other person. And I do somewhat agree with that, but I wanted to look a bit further into it. And with that, I started thinking about, do I dehumanise people? And I thought that that was too much of a negative connotation to it, because I don't dehumanize people. People do. I still see people as people. I care about them. I care about the way they feel about a situation. But I then led into sort of depersonalizing, and that kind of sat a bit better because it is a matter of depersonalizing. And I think most people do the depersonalizing thing, which I'll touch on in a second, when I go into sort of the categories of what happens with me and why it might be different in relation to my autism, to the way autism affects me. As with any of these videos, it's always going to be about how I'm affected by my autism, how my autism manifests within me, and how those traits sit with me. It's an individual process, an individual life that all of us lead as autistic people, so therefore it can affect us differently. But I kind of landed on eventually that I categorize people, and I think again that it is a widely used human trait, and it is one of those times when an autistic trait it lasts longer with a person, or it's more accurately a trait that is overarchingly human, but my autistic brain takes it to the extreme, I think is probably the way to put it. So it kind of lasts longer for me. The categorization of somebody can outlast what you would expect somebody in a neurotypical situation to be, and maybe that it is more extreme and that there are more closed parameters. If we're talking about categorization and putting people in a box, so to speak, that box remains there for longer, and I struggle to see people outside of it, and it can cause problems for me when it does, which I'll get into a little bit more later. I will try to explain how this manifests, but it is quite difficult to explain, and it has to be very much understood that I get that we all categorize that it is a best practice solution that all human brains go to as a standard sorting response to anything, whether that's meeting a new person, whether that's going into a situation. I fully understand that. I'm talking more about the longer lasting situations, as I've already said, and that I find it very difficult to break those expectations that were originally put there, whether that is a societal expectation, whether it's a hierarchical expectation, or whether it's an expectation that I've put on something based on my previous knowledge. I really struggle to get myself out of that thought process. I'm hoping it will make sense once I explain it. I do feel like this one's going to be one that's going to be quite difficult to explain, so I apologise now if I go on a tangent in anything with it, but I've found it quite interesting to look at, but also very difficult to vocalise why I do this, or how it really is for me, and there's a lot of metaphor that I've kind of felt I've had to use to be able to explain it. So I'm going to look at it at different types of categorisation, I suppose. And those categorisations for me sort of fall into people in societal authority positions. So that would be doctors, teachers, the police, etc. Then there's workplace hierarchies, and this also kind of falls within teachers, but it's kind of different. because there's more of a choice to be involved in a workplace. So that's like line managers, peer group, and people that you line manage. So just those working relationships and what they look like. But it also might be that it's a HR department or a different department or that type of thing. And then there's sort of three main close relationships that that I'm going to look at, and that's going to be romantic partners, friendships, so they're chosen relationships, and then your family. And when I'm saying family, I'm saying blood family, so not people who you choose to be a family, which a lot of us tend to have done, but we do still have a family generally that were not chosen for us. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to have a look at so the people who have been put in society into an authority position. And I'm going to touch quite a lot on doctors here because I feel like that's the main one that I have the most interaction with generally. I obviously don't with teachers anymore, and I very rarely have any interaction with the police. So, but it's kind of any bureaucracy sort of situation. So the council or something like that would fall into these positions. But I wanted to talk mainly about doctors because of the fact that they are given this position of power and they are an individual person, and they're somebody that you may see over and over again. The reason why I wanted to look at this as that is because a doctor you can get to know quite well, but you don't know anything about them, about their personal life. They may give you little snippets of their personal life, but it's not part of the equation. So it's understandable that this is something that this is a person you would categorize, and I truly believe most people will categorize a doctor under the same as you would a police officer, or they are their job first. And that's because you're going to see them in relation to that job, and there isn't really a need to know them outside of that. So, and actually professional practice sort of dictates that those things aren't really talked about too much or discussed or gone into too much detail about, because it can break down those boundaries. So they're really relatively easy from a perspective of knowing what to expect. And I know I go to the doctor, explain symptoms, and then from that, look at possible options in relation to that. Same with the police. If you need to call the police about a situation, you kind of know where those social lines are. So I find them extremely stressful because I believe that, because I know in my head that there are certain things that I should and shouldn't do when I go to the doctors, but that can become stressful. And also because it is a professional relationship, I find it problematic because of the fact that when a boundary might be crossed. So for instance, if the doctor gave me information about their personal life, I would probably struggle with that and know how to react. But I think that is the same for most people. They wouldn't know how to react to personal information from a doctor. But I also struggle with explaining myself to the doctor as well in a way that it just becomes very, very problematic. And it becomes problematic because of where I put the doctor in my head, and that it's this hierarchy situation of that person being in a position of authority, then being able to gatekeep situations, me having to explain myself in a way that's understood. But I believe that everybody struggles with this when going to the doctors. I think I may take loads more information than somebody else might do, and I might end up taking up too much time from them, and that's something that I worry about. And there's obviously all of the other issues that come around the fact that I don't know whether I'm ever acting correctly in a situation. So there's all of those problems. But I do believe that with doctors, with the police, that type of thing, they're understood to be authority figures, and therefore there are boundaries, and it actually makes it relatively easy. It makes it easier in a lot of respects to be able to interact with them because there's set expectations. Now, the next one is probably where I have struggled the most, is when it comes to workplace hierarchies. So I'm going to break it down into line manager, peer group, and people that I line manage. And there's kind of the same but the opposite issues when it comes to people I've line managed and people that line manage me. But if I start with my line manager, I have a picture in my head of this is what a line manager should be, what they should do, how they should communicate with me, what they should ask, what they shouldn't ask, and how much of a discussion you should have around private life and things like that. And to me, it's very little in relation to the private life side of it, but they should be quite supportive in relation to if I do talk about my private life, about needing adjustments for something or needing some support with something, or them needing to understand why something's changed for me, then that's the only time personal stuff really needs to be talked about. And I've really struggled over time, and I've only just really realised this, that as you are spending more time, or you're managed for a longer period of time with your line manager, they start sharing private information about themselves, and you start sharing private information about yourself. I don't tend to, but it obviously comes out at times, and the relationship becomes harder to keep that boundary. And I I then start struggling with the relationship that I have with my line manager, because I don't. They're falling into two different categories. Is it falling into a friendship? Is it falling into a working relationship where the person line manages me? And that's what I mean about the categorization for it then becomes really problematic, and it all seems to fall apart after that, because I don't know where the lines are drawn. Whereas when the lines are drawn, I understand you have things like jovial conversations, that type of thing, but when personal stuff's being discussed from your line manager, it makes it very difficult for me to go, right, where does our relationship sit? And it can be really, really frustrating for me and unintentionally break down the relationship. And it's been really interesting to think about it from that perspective. In relation to my peers, I understand that that's very similar to having friendships, but there's still a line to be drawn. It's much more complicated when it comes to your peers, people that you are. So I was a regional manager, so that means that other regional managers. So I've shared experiences, and there's some little elements of talking about your personal life, but people seem to talk very deeply about their personal life and know everything about what's going on in each other's personal life, and that's not how I work, and that can make me then seem like I'm being more guarded, and it's not. It's just that I can't have that I don't want that relationship. I can't deal with having that relationship that blurs the lines between work and home, and that can make me seem quite standoffish with people. But it does make it. But all of this makes it very difficult for me to put myself in that person's shoes, because I see that they're doing something from a different way to the way that I would do it, and usually it's coming from, like it would do with my line manager, it'd be the same with a peer group. And then if we just reverse the line manager situation, where obviously there are going to be times that me as a line manager is going to have to deal with personal situations in relation to that person, and I empathize with that person and deal with it, but then sometimes they'll want to talk more about that personal relationship in a way that isn't really, it's not part of the process that's expected, as in, how do I help you and support you through this? But I also feel the need that I don't want to stop them from talking about that thing, but then I worry that they're then feeling like we've got a closer relationship than we have, and it's leaking out into being not from a working relationship to a personal relationship. And I think this is where the problem lies with this one, is the boxes in all of them. You can put people in those boxes, so you can put them in, that's my line manager, this is somebody in my peer group, and that is somebody who I line manage, but they all leak into each other, and it becomes really, really problematic for my brain to be able to keep all of those things in one place. And having multiple different people that you work with makes it really hard. And it's the same with like a HR department. So somebody in HR, for instance, it could be that if I was dealing with a situation where it was a disciplinary with a person that I was running the disciplinary for, you have one relationship with that person, but then if they're talking to you about something in relation to you, then it's a different person. And that makes that very, very difficult, very complicated to be able to work out, especially because I feel like HR quite often, in my view, and in places that I've worked, overstep that line quite a bit between sort of boundary crossing and saying things that make it very difficult, that are not necessarily professional. So that's the one that I found the most complicated, and it explains why I get to about a year, 18 months in a job, and I just feel like all of the relationships that I've built around me, the working relationships, are starting to fall apart. And I think that's because I've not understood when boundaries have been where they should be, and that I've sometimes maybe crossed boundaries, or I've held boundaries when they've not actually been the right time to do it. And I've just got so confused and so frustrated by it all that I feel like everybody is angry at me, and that's where it kind of comes to. And this is where I find work situations the most complicated out of any of these situations, because they're long lasting, and it has a part to play in a big part of your life. So for me, that is the biggest problematic bit, and that's what I kind of see as the problem for me, is that I'm not aware of it, but suddenly everything's changed. Those relationships that at the beginning, where there's these really clear boundaries, everything's great. When the boundaries start crossing over and merging with each other, my brain gets confused and doesn't know where the boundaries should be, and those social expectations have just totally crippled me to the point of not being able to deal with it, on top of the fact of having sensory issues, on top of the fact of with me having a physical condition, on top of all the other issues that I have in relation to both my mental health, and my physical health, and my neurodivergency. All of those things together, I can see now why it all became so problematic. And it's interesting that's like I say, I get to a year, 18 months, and it just feels like I personally feel like everything's crumbling around me. If I ask other people, they'll tell me nothing's wrong, but I don't believe it. I'm totally in a place where I think everybody thinks that I'm doing a bad job, that I'm doing everything wrong, that I'm not supporting them enough, because maybe one person said it to me, and I'll then not be able to deal with the situation. So yeah, it becomes really, really problematic in a workplace, and it's the most complicated social situation that I find myself in, and it's one that I don't think I'm very easily cut out for, and it's something I need to look for myself in the future to how that's going to work, because that's not a reasonable adjustment to expect everybody to. Well, I don't even know what the reasonable adjustment would be there for me. So then if we go on to chosen relationships, so that's so romantic partners. So for me, I've always had a really clear box of what I expected a romantic partner to be. I don't know where I got it from, but it's definitely, I'm pretty sure I've probably got it from watching TV shows. I think I have put expectations of relationships being this is how a relationship looks. And if anything deviated from that, I got really, really frustrated by it. And I now am not in a romantic relationship, but I have a close friendship with a few people, and that suits me much, much better. And then from a romantic perspective, they're more transient sort of situations. So and that suits me. It suits me a lot better. That's the way that for me, my brain can handle that those romantic bits, they are shorter lived, so there's not a huge amount of expectation on it, and I'm clear about that. I'm clear with the other person is clear with me. We understand, and I'll be very clear on the fact that when it's over, it will be done with, and that's just the way it is, and that burns out very quickly for me because of the stress that is incorporated in it. So for me, having a few really strong relationships is much better than having and me getting the romantic side of it out in different ways. It's more suited to me. It's very, very now exactly what I need it to be, and there's no those boxes are still there, but I get different things from different people from a social perspective, and I hope that they get stuff from me. They say they do, so that's good. And friendships sort of fall into that as well. That friendships for me are strong and deep and meaningful, and the strongest thing that I can have, but only if a very, very small group of people, and there's two people. There's my best friend and my housemate, and both of them I have a very, very good, strong relationship with, but they are very different relationships. They give me very different things, and I give them very different things depending on they suit the two sides of my personality, I suppose, that I need to be able to have and to be able to be okay with, but there be no other expectation on those relationships, and understanding the fact that for me, a friendship is that having a shared interest and a common goal of wanting the best for each other, and those two things are the two things that are important for me, and that's what I have with the friendships that I have in my life, so that's perfect. And then family, which is way more complicated, but I don't want to go too much into it because I think it's quite obvious where family is complicated. You don't choose family; they are family that you have. You can choose to have your family as part of people who are close to you, as I do with my mum, as I do with one of my cousins. And they're close people in my family. But what I realised is that I have a mum box. I had a mum box. My mum box is pretty much kind of blown apart. I don't really expect a huge amount in general from my mum. That's not that would be what I would expect her to do. That box has been blown apart, and now we have more of a friendship more than anything. I don't really have a dad box apart from locking him away and forgetting he exists. But then I've got like an auntie box, and all my aunties fit into that same box. You know, they're all the same kind of thing to me, and I've never had to break them out of it because I don't see them enough for them to be broke out of it. But they're kind of just in this box of what I expect them to be. And then the same with my cousins, but my cousins are a little bit more complicated because this is where I was thinking about subcategorization. So with my cousins, it's like, you're my cousin, and these are what the sort of thought process of when I think of my cousin, I think of my cousin, but I'll think of my cousin who likes horror movies, my cousin who is a teacher, my cousin who lives in Thailand, or no, Abu Dhabi now. So the one that travels everywhere. And that's where it really is. But there's a really clear, this is what I expect from this person, or what I expect this person to be. And I find when I really struggle, the same as when I say with the workplace stuff, it's when people come outside of that box that I expected them to sit within. And that's where it's really complicated because I don't know what to do with it. And I think, again, I'm kind of getting at the point, I think here, that workplace hierarchy, that being in a workplace is the most complicated. It is, to an extent, an enforced place with an enforced hierarchy that boundaries are crossed all the time, and I feel very clear that these are the boundaries that should be there. But a lot of the time I'm forced into not having those boundaries. Whereas all the other things in my life, whether it comes to the authority figure situation, there's that kind of thing with in relation to doctors and that type of thing. They're enforced and they're going to stay that way. And then with romantic partner, like I say, it's not really a thing for me anymore. But it kind of is from those short-lived little dalliances that I have, I suppose. It's not really a box that I put them in, apart from the fact that I don't want anything more than that romantic situation for a short period of time, and then that will be it. My friendships, they have their own boxes. As I've said, my best friend and my housemate, they are very much separate boxes that I keep in relation to those two different people, and they do live happily within those boxes generally, with a little bit of sometimes they shock me, but I know them well enough to be able to talk through the fact of why that box, why I thought they would be in that box in that situation. And family is just strange to me. So yeah, a bit of a weird one. Like I say, this is really difficult to explain, but I hope I've kind of got the point across in my rambling of how it is for me. And I'd love to hear what it's like for other people, because I didn't realise how much of a problem this was, or how much I did this, until I actually sat down and thought about it. And it kind of doesn't answer the question to an extent, but it kind of does as well. Because it's not a matter of not imagining how it's like to be other people, but it kind of is, because you have to have that fully rounded version of somebody for you to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And I feel like I struggle to do it with the people closest to me. So my best friend, my housemate, and my mum, I do struggle to put myself in their shoes, and that's where the difficulty is. But I actually often find it impossible to put myself in somebody else's shoes in another place, in another time, when it's sort of like dictated where their role is with me. That becomes even more difficult, because it's just more complex for me, and I really struggle to get outside of that box. And when it does happen, it seems to break the box apart and makes it so that it's literally impossible for me to be able to sustain a relationship with them. So thank you very much for watching this video. Like I say, it's been a bit of a weird one, this one, because I've not put it, it feels like I've rambled a lot on it, but it has been a difficult one to put into words and what I mean without making it sound worse than it is, because it's really not that bad, but it is complex. If you could drop me a comment, I will try my best to comment back. I always like to hear other people's experiences. And if you could like, share and subscribe, that would be great, but don't worry too much about it. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you on the next video. Thanks. Bye.